An old woman asked for a seat and they pushed her to the floor as if she was worth nothing. People saw it and did nothing. But what nobody knew was who she really was, nor the past she carried, nor what that fall was about to trigger. This isn't just a story of injustice. It's a story that's going to reveal buried secrets, unite separate destinies, and test the heart of everyone involved. Mrs. Eleanor Vance got onto that bus like she did every morning. With her grey shawl, her flat shoes, and the leather bag hanging from her arm. She looked like just another one of thousands of grandmothers traversing the city at a slow pace. It was Tuesday. The smell of sweat, traffic, and people in a rush. No one paid attention to anyone else. The bus was packed as always. Crossing along the eastbound Highway 101, Eleanor entered slowly. No one offered her a seat. She barely managed to hold onto the railing to keep from falling. Her breathing was laboured. She had a slight heart flutter and an old ache in her leg that no longer let her walk like she used to. She walked between the seats. She saw a young woman, well-dressed, sitting in one of the reserved seats. Eleanor approached with a politeness that you don't see much of these days. "Excuse me. Miss, would you allow me to sit down for a moment?" The woman didn't answer. She only turned up the volume on her music. Eleanor tried again, this time touching her arm gently. That's when the woman looked up. She had perfect makeup, fake nails, dark sunglasses, and an expression of pure contempt. "Why don't you stay home? Can't you see this is for people who work?" And without another word, she shoved her with her shoulder hard. Eleanor lost her balance. She let go of the rail. Her body hit the floor with a dry thud. No one screamed. No one ran to help her up. Some turned their heads away. Others pretended they didn't see it. No one knew they were witnessing the start of a story that was going to change everything. And if you're here listening to this, it's because something in you was moved, even just a little. So before we continue, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and leave a like if this story has already touched a part of your heart. And tell me something in the comments. Write the word dignity if you believe no one deserves to be treated like trash just for getting old. Because what comes next isn't just going to hurt. It's going to leave you thinking for days. Chloe Hayes was in the back of the bus. She was 27 years old, carrying a backpack full of notebooks and reviewing some lessons for her second-grade students. When she saw the woman fall, it took her a few seconds to react, but her instinct was stronger. She pushed her way through the passengers, many of whom were still looking out the window. She knelt down next to Eleanor, holding her head carefully. "Are you all right? Does anything hurt?" Eleanor tried to get up, but couldn't. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I just need to sit down." The woman who pushed her looked back out the window as if nothing had happened, as if Eleanor was invisible, as if she hadn't heard the impact. Chloe demanded that the driver stop the bus, but he refused. "If I stop here, I'll get a ticket." "Miss, I can't do it." When they finally managed to reach the intersection with Main Street and Broadway, Eleanor was gone. She had vanished. Some say she stumbled off at the next stop. Others say someone helped her and she left on another transport. But no one had any certainty. Only one thing was left behind. A leather bag. Old, worn, abandoned under the seat where Eleanor had tried to sit. Chloe picked it up. Inside was an embroidered handkerchief, a couple of mint candies, a rosary, and a notebook. A notebook with names and dates handwritten in fine penmanship, and an old photograph partially burned where you could make out 2 children and the incomplete face of a woman. Chloe felt a chill. She didn't know that in her hands was the thread of a story that would drag her deep into the past, to a forgotten truth, to a woman who wasn't who everyone thought she was, and to a family that had lived with a guarded secret for decades. This is the story of Mrs. Eleanor. And we're just getting started. Chloe couldn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the face of the woman falling to the floor again. Her eyes closed. The muffled groan. The dry thud on the bus floor. And what weighed on her the most wasn't the fall, but what came after. The silence. No one got up. No one raised their voice. No one did anything. Since she was a child, Chloe had learned that you don't turn your back on someone else's pain. Her grandmother always said that you don't have to have money to be a good person. And yet on that bus full of adults, it was she, the youngest, who had to kneel down, who helped the woman up, who asked for help. And the woman, where did she go? That was what bothered her the most. After helping her to stand, Chloe saw her take a difficult breath. The woman didn't want to wait for the ambulance. She barely murmured that she didn't want to cause trouble and got off at the next stop, walking alone on the sidewalk as if nothing had happened. But she was staggering. She seemed confused. She had trouble keeping her pace. Chloe tried to follow her, but between the cars, the traffic, and the chaos, she lost sight of her when she turned the corner. She walked several blocks looking for her. She asked a hot dog vendor, a parking attendant, a police officer. No one had seen her. No one knew what she was talking about. She returned home with an uncomfortable feeling as if something was missing in her chest. The next morning, she went straight to the nearest hospital, a small one in the South End district, to ask if they had admitted any elderly woman with a possible fall and physical discomfort. Nothing. She went to another further south in the Queen's neighbourhood. Not there either. She even called 2 private clinics. Not a single match. With every rejection, her anxiety grew. Chloe didn't understand how it was possible for a person to disappear like that in the middle of New York City in broad daylight, among thousands of eyes that saw nothing. Returning home that afternoon, she decided to write down what she remembered. She sat at the kitchen table, took out her school planning notebook, and began to make notes. Woman between 70 and 80 years old, white hair pulled back, grey or brown dress, dark shawl, old brown leather bag, very quiet, polite voice, got off at the corner of Highway 101 and Main Street, did not reappear. As she was writing, something struck her memory. The bag. When she helped the woman get up, she noticed she had a bag hanging from her shoulder. But when she got off the bus, was she carrying it? Did she forget it? Did she drop it? That doubt was like a spark, because if the bag had been left on the bus, maybe it was still there. Chloe left the house immediately. She walked quickly to the Route 44 bus depot in the Bay Ridge area. There, among the mechanics, the drivers, and the smell of diesel, She asked for the bus that had made the Highway 101 downtown route the previous morning. "The one at 9:15 said one of the drivers, wiping his hands with a dirty rag. "Yes. Mr. David drove that one." They looked for him. The man was drinking coffee, standing next to a dismounted tire. He was middle-aged, with a weathered face and a tired but attentive look. Chloe explained everything to him, from the woman's fall to her disappearance. "Mr. David nodded his head. He said yes. He remembered that a woman had fallen, that a girl helped her. But he didn't think it was that serious. So many people get on and off. You can't know how everything ends up, he said with a hint of guilt. Chloe asked him if he had found a bag. "Wait a minute," he replied, and walked toward the lost and found. 3 minutes passed that seemed like an eternity, until he returned with something in his hand. An old leather bag worn with half-broken straps. "Is this it?" Chloe recognized it immediately. It was the same one. She gripped it tightly. The leather smelled of time, of stored dust, of the past. She took it home without opening it. Something inside her told her it wasn't just a forgotten bag. Arriving at her room, she placed it on the bed. She took a deep breath. She opened it carefully, as if something fragile was inside. The first thing she saw was a white handkerchief hand embroidered with the initials EV. Then a worn wooden rosary, and at the bottom, a hardback notebook wrapped in an antique cloth. She took it out delicately. It smelled of storage, of memories. She opened it, and there on the first page, in fine handwriting, almost from another time, she read, "Names I cannot forget," and below a list. Chloe swallowed and turned the page. On the next sheet, taped with yellow tape, was a photograph. A black and white image slightly burned in one corner. A young woman was visible. It could be Eleanor and 2 children no more than 5 years old. One of them was holding a flower, the other a wooden toy. Chloe felt something tighten in her stomach. She still didn't know what those names meant, nor why someone would carry such an old, well-preserved photo inside a bag that clearly had no value to anyone else. But deep inside, something told her she was about to discover something much bigger than a fall on a bus. And much more painful. Because that list wasn't just of names. It was a list of absences, of open wounds, of separated lives. And everything was about to start coming to light. Chloe closed the notebook and held it between her hands as if she were carrying something sacred. The texture of the cover was worn, but still firm. There were no frills, no gold lettering, no decorations. It was an ordinary notebook, the kind sold at any stationery store. But what it contained inside had the weight of a lifetime. She sat on the edge of her bed. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, colouring the sky an orange-grey. Inside the house, everything seemed motionless in silence, as if it too was waiting for her to turn the page. The list continued, names written in small script, ordered by date, some crossed out, others underlined. Next to each one there was a number, possibly an age, and in certain cases, a word. Lost, adopted, not located, deceased. Chloe didn't fully understand what she was looking at. Were they relatives? People Eleanor had known, or perhaps children? On a loose sheet inside the notebook, she found something else. It was a kind of hand-drawn map with crooked lines, as if someone had drawn it from memory. There were words written. Yellow House or Mrs. Helen. Room 2, Laurel Alley. Chloe observed it carefully. The name of a nun, a reference to a house, and an incomplete address. Everything seemed written in a rush, as if it were a memory that had to be captured before it disappeared. She set the notebook aside for a moment and looked at the bag again. Beneath the rosary, she found a small, older notebook, almost illegible. The first pages were blank, but on the back there was a note written in different handwriting. If something happens to me, let them know I didn't forget. I didn't abandon them. They took them from me. And even if the world closes the door on me, I won't stop looking for them. Chloe felt a chill. That sentence wasn't from someone confused. It was from someone broken inside who lived with guilt and hope at the same time. It was from a mother. With a heavy heart, she returned to the notebook and went back to the first page. She reread every name calmly. 2 of them were written in a firmer hand, as if they had been forcefully marked, Daniel and Matthew, both with the same date next to them. The 4th of May, 1971. Then in a corner, barely visible, a phrase that seemed to be written with a different pen. 12th Street, East LA. Mrs. Helen's boarding house. Chloe jumped up. East LA, she murmured to herself. That neighborhood was less than 40 minutes away by subway. She knew the area well because of her mother, who had worked for years at a nearby bakery. What struck her the most was that mixture of loose clues, incomplete memories, and names that seemed to scream from the paper. It was too late to go out, but something inside her wouldn't let her wait until the next day. She put the notebook, the map, and the small book in a backpack, and without telling anyone, she headed for the metro station at Union Square. The neighborhood was dense with tight alleys, unplastered brick houses, cables hanging between poles, and stray dogs roaming among the trash cans. She asked in a store for the street mentioned. The owner, an older man with thick eyebrows, told her that the street existed, but that Laurel Alley hadn't been called that for years. However, he gave her an approximate address. Chloe reached a rusty green gate with the number 156 painted by hand. She knocked. Nothing. She knocked again. A minute later, an older woman, thin, with a blue shawl and a cane, opened the door. "Are you Mrs. Helen?" Chloe asked, her heart racing. "Who's asking?" the woman replied. Suspicious. "You don't know me. I'm Chloe Hayes. I wanted to ask you about a woman. Maybe she lived here recently. Her name is Eleanor." "Eleanor," she took out the notebook. "Eleanor Fifth. I'm not sure of the full last name." The woman was silent. She looked at the notebook. Then she looked Chloe in the eyes. The old woman from the bus. Chloe froze. "How do you know?" "Because a few days ago, a young woman came here. She showed me a picture. She asked about Mrs. Eleanor. And then Eleanor herself came here one night. She asked me to keep an envelope. She didn't tell me anything else. She just cried and then she left trembling." Chloe didn't know what to say. Her head filled with more questions. Who was the woman who looked for her? What was in that envelope? Do you still have it? Mrs. Helen nodded. She went in with difficulty and returned with a brown envelope sealed with an old ribbon. She said that if anyone came, she should only hand it over if they asked about Daniel and Matthew. Chloe felt the air leave her body. Daniel and Matthew, she repeated. They are the names that appear in the notebook. Then it's yours. Chloe held the envelope with both hands. It was light, but its contents weighed more than any brick. She opened it carefully. Inside was a photo. A colour image worn by the years. A young woman, 2 children hugging her. And on the back an inscription written in black ink. The last day at home, before they took them away from me. Chloe closed her eyes. That envelope not only confirmed that Eleanor wasn't just any elderly woman. She was a woman with a broken past. A story violently torn away. And now someone else was also looking for her. But not with the same intentions. Chloe stood for a long time in front of the closed door of the boarding house, with the envelope in her hands and her mind spinning like a whirlpool. The street was almost empty. Only a few children ran by, shouting with backpacks on their backs, and the smell of freshly baked bread coming from a nearby kitchen. She pressed the notebook against her chest and began to walk back to the subway with a certainty. She couldn't leave it like that. That woman, Eleanor, was not just an elderly woman beaten down by the contempt of a stranger. There was something much deeper behind it. When she got home, the first thing she did was sit in front of her old computer, the one that barely turned on, with the internal fan that hummed like a broken blender. She opened a civil record search page and typed the name that appeared in the small book. Eleanor V. She tried different combinations. Eleanor Vance. Eleanor Valdez. Eleanor Vega. Nothing. She changed sites. She searched in databases for birth, death, marriage certificates. Nothing. Not in New York City, nor in New Jersey State. Not even in old records. Then she thought that maybe they weren't full names. Maybe those initials meant something else. She tried searching only for Eleanor and one of the dates written next to the names in the notebook. The most prominent, the 4th of May, 1971. It was clear that this day held significant weight. It appeared underlined twice next to both Daniel and Matthew. She entered a digital archive of old newspapers and looked for news related to that day. There was a note about a mass eviction in East LA in a neighborhood then called the Triumph. It didn't mention names, only that several families had been evicted from an occupied property. Chloe rubbed her eyes. She went back to the notebook. On one of the last pages, written in tight, nervous handwriting, there was an underlined sentence. They erased my name. They erased me from the papers, but not from my memory. That explained everything. Eleanor no longer existed in any record because she was disappeared from the system, perhaps due to negligence, corruption, or simply poverty. She didn't have an official name. She didn't have a birth certificate. She had no history in the archives. She only had her notebook and her pain. Chloe got up from the chair with determination. She took her old cell phone and called a friend, Sarah, who worked as an assistant at a public clinic. She wanted to know if there was a way to verify if a woman of that profile had been treated in recent days without needing a full name. "Do you remember the case you told me about?" Sarah said when she heard Chloe's voice. The woman who was pushed on the bus. Well, a woman like that did come here 3 days ago. She came into the emergency room for a hip injury, but she gave a different name, one that no one could confirm later. What name? Maria Rivers. But she didn't have ID. She just said that and signed with a shaky hand. After one night in the hospital, she left. No one accompanied her. No one picked her up. And in her file, they put down that she was homeless. Chloe felt a knot in her stomach. And do you still have her file? Yes. But it's only 1 page. An entry without follow-up. No one claimed anything. Can I come see it tomorrow? If you come early before 8, I'll show you. But don't tell anyone I let you see it. They're very strict about that here. Chloe hung up. She knew she had to get up early, but she couldn't sleep. She stayed staring at the notebook on the table as if waiting for it to speak to her itself. She read a couple more pages. The annotations became more disorganized as the years went by. There were crossed-out sentences. Single words in the middle of blank pages. Lie. They never looked for me. I don't know if they are still alive. I did wait for them. There were watermarks on some pages. Perhaps tears. Perhaps humidity from some place where she slept outdoors. Near one, 0 inches the morning. She finally fell asleep with her head resting on the table. And the next day, as soon as the sun came up, she put on a sweatshirt, put the notebook and the envelope in her backpack, and headed for the clinic. Sarah was waiting for her at the staff entrance. It was an old building, one that smelled of bleach, cheap medicine, and despair. She signaled for her to enter through a side door. They walked down a narrow hallway to an office with metal filing cabinets. Here it is, her friend said, taking out a thin folder. Chloe opened it. Name Maria Rivers. Estimated age between 70 and 80 years. Reason for admission: fall and hematoma on the left hip. Vital signs stable. Observation: patient, confused. Refuses to answer questions about relatives or address. Voluntary discharge signed out on May 14, 6:40 minutes in the morning. That was 2 days ago, Chloe murmured. And after that, did no one else hear from her? Sarah shook her head. I asked around. No one saw her leave. We thought maybe she left on foot or took a bus. But no one can confirm it. She disappeared again. Chloe remained silent. She no longer had doubts. Mrs. Eleanor had been erased from everywhere. From the archives. From the hospitals. From the streets. Only her story remained, and someone had to tell it. But what Chloe still didn't know was that there was someone else who did know that false name, and it wasn't by chance. The clinic clock marked 7:30 minutes when Chloe went outside. The New York City sky was covered by low, dirty clouds, as if it too carried the weight of an untold story. She walked with the notebook safely tucked under her jacket and the envelope still closed, fearing that time or rain would erase what little remained of Mrs. Eleanor. As she crossed the street, she couldn't shake an idea from her head. If that woman had used a false name at the hospital and had disappeared again, she must have had a very clear reason for doing so. No one who isn't running invents their name twice. No one who hasn't been hurt multiple times avoids being found with such firmness. Back home, She checked the last annotations in the notebook again. It was then that she noticed a page almost hidden between thicker ones. On it, handwritten in pale blue ink, was an incomplete address. Mrs. Helen's boarding house, St. Augustine Alley, and East LA. The date accompanying the note was just 2 weeks old. Chloe knew that kind of data isn't written without reason. If Eleanor had been there, perhaps someone in that place would know something more. Some detail about where she went afterward, or why she was so scared. Without wasting time, she changed her clothes, tied her hair back, and took the subway to the New Lots Avenue station. From there she walked through alleys asking neighbours until a woman selling tamales pointed her to a rusty gate with a small hanging plaque that read, "R. Parsons Boarding House." She rang the bell with some fear. Several seconds passed before a small window in the door opened and an older woman with a thin face and deep eyes observed her from within. "What are you looking for?" "Good afternoon. My name is Chloe. I'm looking for information about a woman who may have lived here recently." Eleanor, an elderly woman, thin with white hair and a dark shawl. The woman didn't answer immediately. She seemed to be sizing her up with her eyes, as if trying to figure out if she was lying or telling the truth just by looking at her. "Many people have lived here," she finally said. "Does she have a last name?" Chloe took out the notebook and showed her the annotation. "This is all I have." The woman looked at the notebook, then lowered her gaze and sighed. The woman who always wrote in the early mornings. The one who talked to herself. Yes, she was here. Chloe felt an electric shock run down her spine. "Do you know how long she lived here?" "Almost 3 months. She rented a small room on the second floor. She paid on time. Quiet. Very clean. She didn't bother anyone. But recently, one night, she arrived very nervous. She packed everything in black bags and left without saying where. She only left a note on the mattress. What did it say? "Thank you for the roof. Sorry for leaving like this. I can't stay where they've already found me." Chloe was silent. "Who found her?" she asked in a low voice. "I don't know. But days before, a very haughty woman came. One of those who smell of expensive perfume. Asking for a woman named Maria Rivers. She said she was a relative who had mental problems and was coming for her. I didn't believe a word of it." "And did Eleanor find out?" "I don't know if it was a coincidence. But 2 days later she was gone and she left no trace. Only the note." Chloe swallowed. "Can I see her room?" The woman hesitated, but finally agreed. They went up together a narrow staircase with worn concrete steps. The room was empty, except for a metal cot and an old plastic table. Next to the window, there were marks of adhesive tape on the wall, as if photos, papers, and memories had been stuck there. Chloe approached. On the window frame, written in pencil, almost invisible, was a name. Matthew. There was nothing more, but it was enough. Going downstairs, the owner of the boarding house told her something she didn't expect. She asked me for only one thing before she left. She told me that if someone good, someone with a truly good heart, looked for her, I should give them this. She took a small blue cloth bag tied with a ribbon from a drawer. Chloe took it carefully and opened it. Inside was a small rusty key and a folded piece of paper. The paper said, "What I have left is hidden. No one touched it for years. If you made it this far, it's because there is still someone willing to understand." Chloe left there with the key clenched in her palm. The wind hit her face as she walked down the street with the certainty that she was getting closer to something big. But she wasn't alone. A man watched her from a corner, sitting on a motorcycle. He had been following her for days, and now he also knew about the boarding house and about the key. The small Takuba hospital was always full. It was an old 3-story building with cracked ceilings and chipped metal chairs in the waiting room. Outside, the line for the emergency room extended to the sidewalk among people carrying wrinkled prescriptions, inconclusive studies, and the hope that they would be seen that day. That morning, around 6:20, an elderly woman crossed the main door alone. She walked with difficulty, a slight limp in her left leg and her shawl incorrectly placed. Her face was pale, her lips dry, and her gaze distant. She didn't have ID, nor a wallet, nor a cell phone, only the clothes she was wearing, and an expression of weariness accumulated over years. When the security guard asked for her name, she hesitated for a second. Then, lowering her voice, she replied, "Maria Rivers." She said it without looking up, as if she didn't want to fully claim the name. The man wrote down the information and gave her a ticket. An hour later, she was called by a young doctor who immediately noticed that the woman had signs of a hip injury and dehydration. She asked her what had happened. "I tripped on the sidewalk," she replied. "Do you live alone?" "Yes." "Do you have any family we can contact?" "No. I'm fine alone." The doctor tried to insist, but the woman closed her eyes and answered no more questions. She was admitted for observation. Her hip was not broken, but the hematoma was deep and her blood pressure was dropping at times. During that night, she didn't speak to anyone. She didn't ask for food. She didn't turn on the television in the room. She just stared at the ceiling as if she was waiting for something or someone. The next morning, before the first shift change, she got up without making a sound. She dressed slowly, folded the blankets, and left the bed made. On the nightstand, she placed a $100 bill and a sheet torn from a prescription pad. "Thank you for the care. I have to go. I'm not sick in the body. Only in the past," and she left. No one noticed her leaving. No one stopped her in the hallways. In the log, it was only recorded that she left with a voluntary discharge. No one accompanied her. No one claimed her. Some nurses later commented that she seemed lost. Others said no, that woman knew exactly where she was going, that she had the eyes of someone who has walked many times without direction, but not without reason. 2 blocks after the hospital, she entered a bakery and asked for a sweet roll. She didn't have coins, so she handed over the $100 bill. The young man at the counter, surprised by her slow and antique accent, tried to strike up a conversation, but she only said, "Do you know if there is a room for rent around here?" "A small one?" He thought for a moment and remembered that his aunt lived alone in a boarding house at the end of Watmock Street. He wrote the address on a napkin and gave it to her. She put it in the pocket of her shawl, took her bread, and left without saying more. What that young man didn't know, what no one knew at that moment, was that that elderly woman had already lived in that same neighborhood, that this path was not new to her. that every street, every corner, every utility pole had a memory imprinted that only she could see. Meanwhile, in East LA, Chloe reviewed the key that Mrs. Helen had given her over and over again. It was small, of opaque brass, with the initials EV artisanally engraved. She tried to find some reference in the notebook, but she didn't find any direct mention of a storage unit, house, or safe. Only some loose phrases. If something happens to me, let them open where fear slept. I hid what I couldn't scream there. Chloe sat down to review everything from the beginning. The notes, the names, the addresses, the details. Something was escaping her. The key was in some point she had already seen, but hadn't known how to read. She returned to the boarding house. She knocked hard on the door. Mrs. Helen opened it, surprised to see her so soon. Did Eleanor happen to mention any place where she kept things from the past? Chloe asked abruptly. Something that wasn't here. The woman thought for a second. Once, when she arrived, she asked if the house still had the old storage room, the one behind the patio. I told her no, that we covered it up years ago, but she insisted. She said that what you bury sooner or later finds a way to come out. It seemed strange to me. Can I see it? They both walked toward the back patio. At the back, under some rusty sheets and old boxes, there was a cracked concrete cover. Mrs. Helen knelt down, pushed one of the boxes aside, and exposed a small lock. Chloe took the key from her backpack. Her hands were shaking. She inserted it. She turned it once. The click was soft and the cover gave way. A smell of dust, wood, and confinement immediately emerged. The light from the patio barely reached the interior. It wasn't large, just a cavity like an underground pantry. Inside was a cardboard box lined with navy blue cloth. Chloe took it out carefully and placed it on a table in the patio and opened it. The first thing she saw was a notebook like the previous one, but much older. On the first page, a full name written in red marker. Eleanor Del Pena. Now she had her full name. Now everything was going to start for real. But at the bottom of the box, there was something else. A cut-out piece of newspaper with a photo and a face that Chloe had seen before. Not in the notebook, not at the boarding house, but on the bus, the day of the push. The face of the woman who knocked Eleanor to the ground. Victoria. And below the photo, a brief note. Daughter of Daniel Del Pena, real estate mogul. Chloe froze. Without wanting to, she had just found the first real clue to the past and a connection that no one had imagined. The name Daniel Del Pena, printed under the newspaper photograph, floated in Chloe's mind like a bell that had just rung loudly. The photo showed V. No ko chuyen lai cham toban. Haidun kiken. Chia se video giup. Min demin fat trien tot hone. Would you like me to continue the story using the new names and the critical connection Chloe just discovered? The children do not need to hear this. Do not tell me what is best for my children. Julia turned to him like an attacking snake. And do not call me Mom. I. Prolonged cohabitation with hostile people. You want surveillance? Any method that documents their behavior legally. Cameras in the common areas of your own home. Legal. Living room. Kitchen. Hallways. Audio and video. Cloud backup. Access from your phone. She gave me a quote. $5,000 upfront retainer, plus hourly fees. I signed the contract without hesitation. The money was worthless compared to the truth. "I'll need access on Tuesday," she said. "Could you get them out for a couple of hours?" "I'll arrange it." On Tuesday morning, during breakfast, I casually mentioned, "I need some things from that specialty market in Coral Gables. Would you mind picking them up? Maybe we can grab lunch together." I gave them a detailed list. Things from a store 30 minutes away. They left at 10. I texted Veronica. She arrived 15 minutes later with equipment cases. Cameras were placed on a living room bookshelf, in a kitchen clock above the table, and in a hallway smoke detector. Small, invisible, recording everything. 90 minutes later, installation complete. "Everything completely normal," she stated. "Don't let them know you're watching. The best evidence comes when they feel safe." That night, I sat in my study with headphones on, watching the day's recordings. Their return from the errand. The conversation in the kitchen as they unpacked groceries. "He's too quiet," Elena said, her voice tight with worry. "It's suspicious. We need another approach." Julian leaned against the counter, arms crossed. The direct hit didn't work. Time for the indirect hit. I saved the file, dated it, and labeled it Evidence Log Entry 1. The following days allowed me to build my case. February 28th. Julian discussed contingency plans. March 1st. Elena worried that I was acting strangely. March 2nd. They looked up lawyers to challenge my mental competency. March 3rd. Julian's search history showed declarations of parental incapacity. Every conversation was documented, saved, and organized into folders by topic. I watched them conspire against me with the methodical patience of someone building a legal case brick by brick. Veronica sent weekly reports, their social media activity, online purchases, public record searches, the digital trail of people preparing for war. On March 4th, I decided to give them exactly what they wanted. At breakfast, I rubbed my temples. I've been feeling so tired lately. Their heads snapped up like bloodhounds on a scent. That night at dinner, I feigned forgetting where I had left my reading glasses. I've been very forgetful. Elena leaned forward, feigning concern. "Maybe you should see a doctor." "Dad." "It's normal at your age," Julian added casually, "but it's definitely worth checking out." I nodded, playing the confused old man. Later, reviewing the recording, I saw them celebrate my confession as if it were a gift. On the night of March 18th, after 3 weeks of evidence, dozens of conversations, and hundreds of hours of recording, I opened my phone and found Harrison Cole's number. Tomorrow, we would build a strategy. It was time to move from documentation to action. The articles appeared on March 5th. I found them scattered on the kitchen counter that morning. Printed pages about cognitive decline, the early symptoms of dementia, and the importance of medical evaluation for seniors. Elena was by the coffee maker watching my reaction. I found this online. I thought it might be helpful to understand what's been happening with you. I picked up the first article and skimmed it with appropriate confusion. I suppose reading wouldn't hurt. Knowledge is power, Julian added from the doorway. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I took the articles to my study, photographed each page, and filed them as evidence. Psychological manipulation documented. They were constructing a narrative. The confused old man who needed intervention, who couldn't be trusted to handle his own affairs. Over the next 3 days, more articles appeared. Residences for people with dementia. The importance of power of attorney. Financial management for those experiencing cognitive difficulties. Each one was carefully placed where I would find it. Each one was photographed and filed. On March 8th, the surveillance cameras caught them in the living room, believing they were alone. "We need an expert opinion," Julian said. "Someone who can evaluate him professionally." "A psychologist?" Elena's voice held equal parts hope and guilt. "I know someone. Dr. Elias Thorne, a clinical psychologist specializing in elderly cognition. We set up a casual lunch. I introduce them. Elias makes observations. Will he do it ethically? Will he be objective? If your father shows symptoms, Elias documents them. If not," Julian shrugged, "then we'll know for sure." I watched this conversation 3 times, taking notes. The tension was escalating. They were seeking external validation for their version of events. On March 10th, I met Julian for lunch at a cafe in Coconut Grove. He had suggested it that morning so we can get to know each other better without the stress of work. And I accepted with appropriate gratitude. Dr. Elias Thorne joined us 15 minutes in. "Hey, this is my friend Elias." I mentioned him. The psychologist. We shook hands. Elias. About 40-something. Professional demeanor. Cautious eyes. "Julian told me about you. Successful sale. Congratulations." We talked for an hour. My performance was impeccable. I occasionally searched for words, asked Elias to repeat questions, and commented on my forgetfulness. I didn't exaggerate, just a hint of confusion. Elias maintained professional distance, but I caught him watching me, evaluating, cataloguing. "It was a pleasure meeting you," Elias said as lunch ended, handing me his card. "If you ever want to discuss professional topics, I'm available." I put the card in my pocket. Evidence, not service. That night, the surveillance cameras recorded Julian calling Elias from the living room. The speakerphone on. "What did you think?" Julian asked impatiently. "He's 63. Some age-appropriate variation in memory isn't unusual." Elias's voice was carefully neutral. "I can't make clinical assessments based on an informal lunch conversation. But if there were genuine concerns, I could evaluate him formally. With his consent." "Yes. But Julian, I'm not comfortable being part of this. If you have legitimate concerns about his well-being, there are proper channels." "Sure. I'm just exploring options," After hanging up, Julian's face darkened. "We'll find someone else." I saved that recording with particular satisfaction. Even when they tried to corrupt professionals, ethics intervened. From March 12th to 17th, I continued my performance. Small errors, confusion, repeated questions. On the 15th, at breakfast, I asked Elena about the plans we had discussed the night before, feigning forgetfulness. Her eyes lit up with excitement, barely concealed. The surveillance cameras recorded everything. Their conversations about my decline. Julian researching commitment procedures. Elena worrying that things were moving too slowly. On March 18th, I adjusted my strategy. At dinner, I casually commented that I had been thinking about updating my will. Julian suggested it given the business sale. I want to make sure everything is in order. A dead silence fell. Then Elena, trying to sound nonchalant. "That's responsible. Dad. When are you meeting with him? He'll be preparing the documents soon. Making sure you're well taken care of." I left the words hanging in the air. Bait in a trap. After dinner, I retreated to my study. The surveillance cameras recorded them in the kitchen. They spoke in low voices, but the microphone caught everything. "He mentioned the will," Elena said, barely containing her hope. "That doesn't mean he's changing it in our favor." Julian's voice held a warning. "It could be the opposite. But if he really is confused, if we document that he's not competent when making changes, then we challenge them later. Either way, we need more evidence of his decline. Real evidence, not just observations." They talked for 40 minutes, planning how to document my supposed incompetence. Video, everything. Record strange behavior. Build a case for incapacity that would invalidate any legal change against their interests. I watched them celebrate their cleverness, pouring wine and toasting to progress. They thought they were winning. I closed the laptop, opened my phone, and searched for Harrison Cole's number. 3 weeks of recordings, conversations, plans, attempts at manipulation, psychological warfare, all captured with perfect digital clarity. Tomorrow, we would discuss how weeks of evidence could be turned into a legal strategy, how surveillance could be a tool for pressure, how their own words could destroy them. I had documented their plan with the same methodical patience they had used on mine. Only I had done it better. With more detail. With more strategy. It was time to move to the next phase. It was time to show them what happened when they underestimated a man who built an empire from scratch, who understood that true power lay in preparation, documentation, and knowing exactly when to strike. I texted Harrison, "I have new compelling evidence. Need an urgent meeting." He responded in minutes. "Friday at 10, 0 inches the morning. Bring everything." I hung up the phone. Through the study window, the moonlight painted the lawn silver. In the house around me, they slept soundly, believing they were the architects of my ruin. They had no idea they were building their own. The morning light streamed through the study windows. March 19th at 8, I picked up the phone and dialed Harrison Cole's direct number. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Sterling, your message said you had evidence." Weeks of it. Surveillance recordings, conversations, attempts at manipulation, all documented. I need to meet today. This afternoon at 2, bring everything. I spent the morning organizing it. I created a folder on my laptop called Legal Evidence Package. Surveillance files copied, organized by date and severity. Printed transcripts of their most damning conversations. Julian talking about competency challenges. Elena worried about my suspicious silence. Both celebrating their supposed progress toward controlling my assets. Veronica's weekly reports went into a manila envelope, underlined and tabbed. I loaded everything onto 2 USB drives, one for Harrison and one backup. At 2, I sat across from Harrison in his conference room. The USB drive and documents between us, like exhibits in a trial. He watched 3 hours of recording, read all the transcripts, and studied Veronica's behavioral analysis. Finally, he leaned back, fingers interlaced. This is extensive. Multiple legal options, restraining orders, civil lawsuit, criminal charges for attempted poisoning. He tapped the trust document I had mentioned. But first, we protect your assets. Irrevocable living trust. How does that work? Assets are transferred to the trust. It becomes an independent legal entity. An independent trustee administers it. You set the conditions for beneficiary access. Once signed, they are untouchable. Not even you can modify them. He pulled out a notepad and began sketching the structure. We'll make it bulletproof. They won't be able to access it through lawsuits, manipulate the administrators, or effectively challenge it. How long would it take? A week. If we act now, you'll transfer the majority of your assets. Keep enough liquidity for personal use. We'll establish strict conditions for Elena's eventual access. What conditions? Harrison smiled. A sharp professional grin. Whatever you want. Age requirements. Financial independence. Absence of pending lawsuits. In short, any measure that ensures she cannot access the money through coercion or fraud. Over the next 5 days, we built an impenetrable fortress around my wealth. March 20th. Trust structure designed. $25 million transferred to the trust. $5 million kept liquid for my use. Elena could access it at age 45, 9 years from now, if she demonstrated 5 years of financial independence and had no civil or criminal cases against her for financial reasons. On March 23rd, a meeting with Florida Fiduciary Services. 2 fiduciary officers, professional and impartial, explained their role. They would follow this document to the letter. No family pressure, no manipulation, no exceptions. March 24th. Final signing. Harrison's conference room again, but this time with a notary and fiduciary officers present. The documents lay across the table like a treaty ending a war. I signed each page, initialed and dated. The notary officially sealed each signature. Your assets are protected, Harrison said as I put the copies in a leather folder. She cannot manipulate, coerce, or sue you for them. The trust is irrevocable. Case closed. I drove home with a feeling I hadn't felt since February. Power. Control. security. At home, life continued its strange theatre. They still knew nothing of the trust. The surveillance cameras recorded their casual conversations about the inheritance, their certainty that eventually my money would be theirs. March 28th. Breakfast. Buttered toast. Elena mentioned when we inherit, as if it were inevitable. That night, Julian's laptop search history, how to challenge a will in Florida. I decided to tell them on April 1st, an auspicious date for plans to unravel. On March 31st, I texted both of them. Family meeting tomorrow. 10:00 inches the morning. In the living room. Important. Harrison had advised doing it in public or with witnesses. They could become aggressive. My house, I replied. My rules. The cameras would record everything. April 1st arrived. A clear, bright day. I set up my laptop connected to the television with the surveillance footage ready. At 10, they entered the living room. A palpable, nervous energy in the air. I stood. They sat. The sofa was lower than I was, establishing a hierarchy. I have made decisions about my estate. I filed the trust document. I have created an irrevocable living trust. Their attention sharpened. I explained systematically. $25 million transferred. Independent trustee. Conditions of access. Minimum age 45. Financial independence. No pending lawsuits. I watched their faces register comprehension. What? Elena's voice cracked. Are you cutting me out? I am protecting my assets from manipulation. Julian leaped up from the sofa. All this over the restaurant. A mistake. And you? A mistake. I picked up the remote and hit play. Their voices filled the room. Surveillance footage. Them talking about my competency issues. Planning to document my decline. Celebrating their progress toward the inheritance. You spied on us, Elena cried now. Your own daughter. I protected myself from those who tried to drug me into signing legal documents. We're going to sue. Julian stepped forward, poorly disguising his aggression. We're going to challenge this. You can't. It's irrevocable. It's done. Legally bulletproof. I looked him in the eyes without blinking. Try to challenge it. Don't waste your money on lawyers. We've lived here for 5 years. We have rights. You have no rights to my money. You never did. Julian stormed out. Elena followed, sobbing. I went back to my study, reviewed the camera recording of the confrontation I had just captured, saved it with the date and time, and a label, evidence of reaction. The rage confirmed their guilt. The following week, the house became a battlefield. Doors slamming. Hostile silence. Calls to lawyers were overheard, all saying the same thing. The trust was solid, unshakable. On April 7th, Elena attempted reconciliation. She knocked on my study door, tears welling up. Dad, we can fix this. I'm your daughter. My daughter would never have tried to poison me. It was a mistake. Please leave my study. She left, I sat alone, staring at the wall, knowing what came next. The trust protected my money. Now, I needed to reclaim my house. I opened my notebook and wrote 4 words: get them out of the house. That same night, I called a real estate agent, Linda Moretti, recommended by my banker for her discretion and speed. I want to sell my house. When can we list it? I can see it tomorrow morning. If it's as you describe, we could list it this weekend. April 8th. She arrived with a tape measure and a professional appraisal. I walked through the rooms where my daughter and son-in-law still lived, evaluating the market value of the house they were borrowing. A lovely property. I can list it for $7 million. This market moves fast, but the property must be vacant for showings. It will be. The listing went live on April 10th. First showings scheduled for April 12th. I notified Elena and Julian via text message. Showings Friday. You'll need to be out for 3 hours. You're selling the house? Julian replied by text. Yes. There was no response. They left on Friday morning. And when they returned, they found business cards from potential buyers on the kitchen counter. Their faces registered the comprehension that I was completely dismantling their life. On April 15th, I asked Harrison to draft the eviction notice formal, legal, final, giving them 60 days to vacate. I handed it to them that night as they sat in the living room, their borrowed living room. Julian read it, his face darkening. He tore it in half. You can't evict us. This is our home. Read the notice. Challenge it all you want. No lease. No rent. No tenant rights. 60 days. June 15th. We'll fight this. Try it. They hired a lawyer on April 16th. I listened to their consultation call via surveillance cameras. The lawyer's assessment matched Harrison's. If there's no lease, he has grounds. You live there by permission, which he is now revoking. Harrison filed the eviction lawsuit on April 20th. The court date was set for May 3rd, 3 weeks away. Meanwhile, I rented an apartment downtown. Month-to-month lease. Oceanfront. Quiet. A clean place. No grudges. I moved out on April 28th. The house became hostile territory. I stayed mostly at the apartment, returning only for necessities. On each visit, the surveillance cameras captured their desperation. Elena crying, Julian raging, both calling lawyers who had no solutions. May 10th arrived. Miami-Dade Courthouse. 3rd floor. Eviction trial. Harrison and I sat at the plaintiff's table. Across the aisle, Elena, Julian, and their lawyer. Young and overmatched. Aware he had no case. Judge Vance took the bench. A man in his 52nd, serious-looking, experienced in seeing people try to evade consequences. Their lawyer stood. Your Honor, my clients have lived in this property for 5 years. Under what agreement? Judge Vance interrupted. His family. The plaintiff is Ms. Sterling Fox's father. That is not a lease agreement. Do they pay rent? No. Do they have a written lease? No, Your Honor. Then they are guests without a contract. Mr. Sterling has given appropriate 60-day notice. He looked at Harrison. Yes. Your Honor. Served on April 15th. They have until June 15th to vacate. Judge Vance reviewed the documents. I see no legal impediment to this eviction. The plaintiff is the owner of the property. The defendants have no lease or rental agreement. Notice was proper. He looked at Elena and Julian. You have until June 15th. After that date, law enforcement can intervene. Motion granted. The gavel cracked. Final decision. In the hallway, Julian confronted me, his voice low and menacing. You'll regret this. You're destroying your own family. I am removing those who poisoned me. We'll make you pay. With what money? I walked away, leaving him sputtering in the hallway. The next 5 weeks were a tense standoff. I stayed at the apartment. They remained in the house, packing slowly, desperately searching for rental properties they couldn't afford without my help. The surveillance cameras recorded endless arguments. Elena breaking down. Julian's fury at their complete defeat. On June 14th, I received confirmation. The buyer of the house had completed the inspection and the sale was approved for closing in August. Pending possession handover. June 15th was moving day. I arrived at the house at noon. A large moving truck was in the driveway loading furniture. Elena, eyes red, face haggard, gave instructions to the movers. Julian loaded boxes, his jerky movements reflecting contained fury. They didn't even greet me. I stood on the lawn watching them load their possessions. Everything I had bought for them. Everything they had accumulated during 5 years of living off my generosity. The truck pulled away at 4. They drove off in Julian's car without looking back. I entered the empty house, the echo of footsteps ringing on the hardwood floor. No furniture, no trace of them. No trace of poison in the air. Room by room, I walked through the reclaimed space. Marks on the walls where pictures once hung. Indentations in the carpet where furniture had been. The house felt like an empty shell, contaminated by what had happened inside, but finally blissfully empty. My phone vibrated. Harrison. Eviction completed. Ready to talk civil lawsuit. I stood in the center of the living room. My living room. Looking around at the emptiness. Selling the house would erase their presence completely. But first, one more legal action. One final blow. I texted back. Yes. Let's schedule a meeting for Monday. It's time for this to be definitive. I wrote my reply to Harrison. Yes. Let's schedule the meeting for Monday. It was time for this to be permanently on the record. The empty living room surrounded me. No furniture. Just the hardwood floor and the echo. I sat down, my back against the wall, laptop resting on my knees, and opened the evidence folders one last time. Months of documentation, surveillance recordings ordered by date, hospital medical records, Mateo's statement, Veronica's reports, every conversation, every attempt at manipulation, every proof that what happened to me was not paranoia, but premeditated exploitation. I created a final chronological document, printed everything, and organized it into a tabbed, expanding folder. Each item told part of the story. Taken together, they were undeniable. On Monday morning, June 16th, I met Harrison in his office. He spread the evidence across the conference table as if it were an indictment. Civil lawsuit under Florida Statute 825.103, Harrison said, taking notes. Elder exploitation, financial manipulation, attempted battery by drugging, coercion, aggravated emotional distress, fraud, conspiracy, seeking $500,000 in damages plus costs. This isn't about money, I said. I know. It's about public record documenting what they did. He looked up from his notes. You want consequences? Exactly. We filed the complaint on June 17th. Elena and Julian received the court notification in their new apartment, a small two-bedroom unit in a neighborhood far removed from the luxury of Coral Gables. The process server reported they had barely unpacked. Their lawyer contacted Harrison a few days later, his voice tight on the speakerphone. My clients can't afford this. They're already ruined. They should have considered that before attempting to drug and defraud their benefactor, Harrison replied coldly. Discovery began. Harrison requested their financial records. Bank statements revealed the truth. No savings. Living paycheck to paycheck on credit cards. Drowning in debt created by their life expectations. On June 28th, the settlement offer arrived. I met Harrison in his office to review it. $50,000 payment plan. Private admission of guilt. No trial. It's reasonable, Harrison said cautiously. They clearly can't pay the full judgment, but the settlement would be confidential. No public record. I slid the papers back across his desk. No. I want this to be public. I want it on the court records forever. Trial is risky. The judge could award less compensation. I don't care about the money. I care about the record. I looked him in the eyes. They tried to destroy me. I want official record that they were wrong and I was right. Harrison nodded slowly. Then we go to trial. July became the month of preparation. Matteo confirmed he would testify. The hospital doctor provided an expert affidavit. Veronica prepared the surveillance evidence for court presentation. I gave a deposition. Hours of questions answered under oath, laying the factual foundation. July 25th. Preliminary hearing. The judge set the trial date for July 28th. That Monday morning dawned clear and hot. I dressed in my best suit and arrived early at the Miami-Dade County Courthouse. Judge Hastings presided. She was in her 50 seconds. Known for her impartiality and strong rulings, Harrison had recommended a bench trial instead of a jury trial. Judges understand elder law better than average citizens, he explained. Opening statements. Harrison presented the timeline and evidence summary with meticulous precision. Their lawyer, young and out of his depth, argued that a family misunderstanding had been exaggerated. Matteo testified first. He described the restaurant incident with full conviction. I saw Mrs. So. Sterling Fox pour something from a small vial into Mr. Sterling's wine glass while he was away from the table. clear. Liquid. Deliberate action. Their lawyer attempted cross-examination. Could you have been mistaken? No. I know what I saw. I couldn't keep quiet. The hospital doctor explained the diazepam analysis results. Dosage. Dangers. Veronica presented the surveillance methodology, chain of custody, and authentication of the recordings. Day 2. July 29th. The surveillance video played on the courtroom screen. Their own voices filled the space, discussing competency issues, planning Elias's consultation, and celebrating their supposed progress toward the inheritance. Julian said, "He's 63, not lucid anymore." Elena's voice said, "We deserve this money." I watched Judge Hastings take notes, her expression serious and focused. Elena testified, crying. She admitted to the restaurant incident, but claimed she only wanted him to listen to her about important papers. Julian testified. Defensive and hostile. He blamed me for overreacting to a family conflict. Then it was my turn. The witness stand felt solemn, formal, everyone watching me. I stated my name, my age, and my relationship to the defendants. I answered Harrison's questions calmly and precisely. Restaurant surveillance, trust creation, eviction. I presented the evidence one by one. Cross-examination became aggressive. "Aren't you being vengeful, Mr. Sterling? I'm seeking accountability." There's a difference. Judge Hastings asked her own question. Why pursue a civil suit after fiduciary protection and eviction? I looked straight at her. Because what they did was wrong. It needs to be on public record for my protection, as a precedent for the truth. July 30th. Closing arguments. Harrison, this is a textbook case of elder exploitation, attempted battery by drugging, financial manipulation, psychological coercion. The evidence is overwhelming. Their lawyer, family conflict and poor judgment. Yes, but not criminal exploitation. Judge Hastings closed her notebook. I will issue the ruling in writing in 2 weeks. I left the courthouse in the late afternoon heat with the satisfaction of having completed my task. I spoke the truth publicly, presented the evidence. Now justice would decide if the truth mattered. 2 weeks of waiting. 2 weeks wondering if the system would validate what I had suffered or dismiss it as family drama. I returned to my temporary apartment, watched the sunset over Biscayne Bay, and waited for the world to confirm what I already knew, that I had been right to protect myself, to defend myself, to demand justice. August 15th. The dawn light filtered over the ocean outside my balcony. Coffee steamed in my hand. Bitter. Familiar. Comforting. 2 weeks after the trial ended, the phone rang at 9. Mr. Sterling. Harrison. We have the verdict. I sat down. The infinite ocean stretching out before me. The judge ruled in your favor. Total victory. Clear and convincing evidence of elder exploitation, attempted financial fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress was found. Judgment for $350,000 plus court costs, $75,000 in punitive damages. $425,000 total. The number seemed abstract. There's more, Harrison continued. Permanent restraining order. They are prohibited from contacting you directly or indirectly. No calls. No letters. No communications through third parties. Violation results in contempt charges. And the payment? They have nothing. Court-ordered payment plan. Garnishment of future wages until the debt is settled could take years. But the judgment is public record. Searchable permanent documentation of what they attempted. That's what I wanted. Not the money. Documentation. Validation. Public record that I wasn't paranoid or cruel. That I was the victim of an attack. And I had every right to defend myself. Thank you, Harrison, for everything. You did the work. I just legalized it. After hanging up, I sat watching the sunrise. The written opinion arrived by email an hour later. I read every page. Judge Hastings wrote, "The evidence presented demonstrates the premeditated exploitation of an elderly person by those in positions of trust. The incident at the restaurant, the attempt to drug someone to facilitate document signing, constitutes a felony in itself. Subsequent surveillance recordings reveal ongoing manipulation and planning. This court finds the defendant's actions reprehensible and deserving of the maximum civil sanctions." Reprehensible. Maximum penalty. Public document. I printed the opinion and filed it. One more document in a case now closed. On August 16th, I closed on the sale of the Coral Gables house. Sold to a young family for $2.75 million. They will never know what happened within those walls. They will fill it with different memories, different lives, different futures. That same day, I bought a downtown apartment. 10th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Ocean views to the horizon. $850,000 cash purchase from the house sale. Modern. Impeccable. No history. I moved in on August 18th. Furniture arrived and was simply placed. Nothing excessive. Nothing unnecessary. The space felt like taking a breath after being underwater. August 20th. Last meeting with Veronica in her Pinewood office. The certification still hung on the wall. Case closed, she said, handing me a USB drive. All the surveillance recordings, reports, and documentation. Go on the record that I thank you for everything. You made it easy. They were predictable. She stood and extended her hand. Take care. Mr. Sterling. We shook hands. The matter concluded. The professional relationship was over. On August 22nd, I sat on my new balcony, phone in hand. I searched for Elena's contact, my finger hovering over the screen. Delete contact. A confirmation box popped up. I pressed yes. Her name vanished. Julian's followed. Both disappeared from my phone, from my life, from my future. The restraining order legally barred them from communication. Even if they wanted to apologize, reconcile, or explain, the law prevented it. 3 years minimum. Enough time for life to move on without them. I felt nothing. neither satisfaction nor sadness. Just a serene peace. On August 23rd and 24th, I established new routines. Coffee on the balcony in the morning, walks by the sea in the afternoon, reading at night with the sound of the ocean drifting through the open windows. I called old friends I had neglected during the chaos, made lunch plans, reconnected, and rebuilt my social life outside of surveillance and legal battles. On August 25th, the sunset painted the sky in layers, orange blending into purple, then deep blue. I stood on my balcony, coffee cooling in my hand, watching the day turn into night. 6 months since February. Since that restaurant, since Matteo's warning, the glass switch, and everything that followed, I protected my assets through the trust, evicted them from my house, held them accountable with a civil judgment, and put their exploitation on public record. I won, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival, like emerging from dark waters and realizing I was still breathing. My daughter had tried to poison me. That truth weighed on me, unchangeable. But I refused to be a victim. I refused to accept the manipulation. I refused to let trust make me vulnerable to destruction. The ocean stretched infinitely, the horizon line crisp and defined. Somewhere in the city behind me, Elena and Julian lived with the consequences. A court debt that would follow them for years. A public record that affected their job applications and background checks. A restraining order that prevented them from spinning their story or seeking reconciliation on their own terms. I didn't hate them. Hate required energy, attention, emotional dedication, all that I had dedicated to documentation, preparation, and legal battles. Now I only had peace. The sun touched the horizon. The colors deepened, and the city lights began to twinkle behind me. My coffee was cold, but I didn't move to refill it. I simply stood there, watching the cycle of nature continue, oblivious to human drama. I built an empire from nothing, sold it for $30 million, protected $25 million through an unshakable trust, lost a daughter, but saved myself. I found justice in the courts, and peace in separation. Some stories end with family reunions, forgiveness, and healing. This one ended with distance, documentation, and the relief of being safe. The sun disappeared behind the ocean, darkness settling around me. I finished my cold coffee, left the cup on the balcony railing, and watched the stars appear. Tomorrow I would call my former partner about that consulting opportunity. Next week, I would have lunch with friends. Eventually, I would date, travel, and fill my days with something other than litigation. But tonight I simply stood here, free, protected, alone, but not lonely. The ocean whispered against the shore below. The city hummed with its infinite rhythm. Life went on, indifferent to individual struggles, offering new days to those who survived old battles. I had survived, and that was enough. If you liked this story, please hit like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click on the box to the left. Thank you for watching.